Even in normal times, you can see a bit of smoke at the summit of the Kenlaoan volcano in the Philippines. It's one of numerous active volcanoes in the Southeast Asian archipelago. But earlier this week, it erupted in force. And this time-lapse video shows the explosion that sent a plume of ash 2.5 miles into the air. The mountain has done this before. Here's a glimpse of what it looked like during an eruption last December. The Kenlaoan volcano is part of the hotbed of volcanic and seismic earthquake activity that encircles the Pacific Ocean, what's known as the Ring of Fire. Thermal video of the explosion that started Monday captured gas and volcanic material rapidly flowing down the mountain slopes. Because it's seen months of heightened activity, most of the people who live nearby were evacuated last year. But authorities are still telling residents to steer clear of Kenlaoan's permanent danger zone, which extends 2.5 miles from the volcano itself. Thank you for taking some time to watch the world from A to Z this Thursday. My name is Carl Azuz and I'm happy to see you. The U.S. stock market, like several around the world, has been on a wild ride over the past week. After several days of declines, some of them dramatic, the Dow Jones Industrial Average of 30 significant stocks jumped up almost 3,000 points or just under 8% yesterday. The main reason? U.S. President Donald Trump announced that many of the tariffs, the additional taxes he'd planned on goods from other countries, would be paused. His administration is still imposing tariffs of 10% on new imports. What's delayed are what the government calls reciprocal tariffs, significantly greater tax increases for dozens of countries that currently charge their own higher tariffs on U.S. goods. The Trump administration will hold off on those for at least 90 days. There's one notable exception, though: China. It's responded to new U.S. tariffs by increasing its taxes on American products, and the U.S. says it'll push its China tariffs even higher. There is a trade deficit between these two countries. China imports far less from the U.S. than it exports to America. But many media outlets are calling their feud a trade war that could see certain prices rise on both sides of the Pacific. President Trump has been pressured over this issue by Democrats and some Republicans. Several economists have said the tariffs could lead to a recession, a shrinking of the U.S. economy, and critics have said the back and forth alone has weakened it. The Trump administration says the threat of tariffs has made dozens of countries want to negotiate new trade deals with the U.S., and that America is now better positioned for better agreements.
From home life to work life, you're likely juggling several responsibilities at once, and that can take a toll.
Unfortunately, we often go on autopilot and we don't necessarily take a step back and recognize all the sources of stress in our lives and how it might be affecting us emotionally and physically.
Psychologist Adam Borland with Cleveland Clinic says sometimes people go down unhealthy avenues when trying to cope, like drinking alcohol or using other substances. Instead, he challenges those who are stressed to focus on a healthy daily routine that includes healthy eating, exercising, and getting quality sleep. Focusing on self-care can also help your body recharge.
I often encourage my patients to engage in meditation or some sort of deep breathing exercise.
Borland says to also engage in social activities, maintain communication with sources of support, and tap into hobbies or creative outlets that you enjoy and can give you a break. He says to also stay in touch with your doctor or mental health professional and monitor behaviors that may be caused by stress that seem unusual, like arguments with loved ones or a drop in work productivity.
We always want to take a step back and get a sense of where is my stress level right now and what can I do to prioritize self-care.
On this date in world history, the biggest volcanic blast in recorded history took place on April 10th in 1815. Indonesia's Mount Tambora, which remains active today, literally blew apart. Historians say at least 10,000 people were killed by the blast, the lava, and the tsunamis it caused, but Mount Tambora's eruption spewed so much ash, sulfur, and pumice into the air that scientists say it blocked sunlight and altered the global climate, causing crops to fail and contributing to the deaths of tens of thousands as a result. On April 10, 1912, what was then the largest and most luxurious passenger ship set sail from Southampton, England. It made a stop the next day before heading out into the Atlantic toward New York, and though it was called unsinkable, it never reached its destination. The RMS Titanic struck an iceberg on April 14th and sank in the hours that followed. And a landmark peace agreement was reached on this date in 1998. It was called the Good Friday Agreement, or the Belfast Agreement, and it was signed by the governments of Northern Ireland, the Republic of Ireland, and the United Kingdom. The goal was to end a decades-long conflict in Northern Ireland. It largely succeeded. The Good Friday Agreement established a new government there and increased cooperation between it, the Republic of Ireland, and the United Kingdom.
Word of knowledge. What part of the brain is most closely associated with speech and language processing? Broca's area, hypothalamus, Meyer's loop, amygdala. Named for a 19th century French doctor who did extensive research on brain lesions, Broca's area is linked to speech.
Sometimes people hear a little voice in their head when they think. That's called subvocalization or auditory imagery. Subvocalization is common for people to hear during stressful situations, but it's probably the most notable when reading. And that internal voice isn't just an overactive imagination at work, it's speech. Sort of. Subvocalization activates the brain and body in much the same way as speaking. NASA researchers found that speakers make micro-movements with the lips, larynx, throat, and tongue in very similar ways to actual speech. They just don't realize it. Even the same areas of the brain that process sound are activated, which is why we can sort of hear the voice. So why do our brains work this way? Some studies say that the inner voice develops in early childhood, just a few years after children start speaking out loud and saying things to themselves. And it's likely cemented into practice with reading because most people learn to read by sounding out words, binding the speech center to the act of reading. But not everyone subvocalizes. Deaf people commonly experience sub-imaging, where they see instead of hear the words, and make small movements with their hands when reading. And some people who can hear aren't able to subvocalize or speak to themselves with words. But everyone has some sort of sub-imagery or sub-communication knocking around in their head. For some it's pictures, for others it's more conceptual. Linguistic studies from the 1960s and 80s say having no voice in your head is advantageous for fast reading, since subvocalization actually goes through the neural processes of saying a word. People can only read about as fast as they can talk, unless they're skimming the text. There are actually classes you can take to stop subvocalization while reading in hopes of turning pages faster. However, subvocalization is known to improve reading comprehension, auditory memory, and a host of other skills.
A beloved teacher from the Keystone State is the first one we're announcing today, talking about Mr. Spital, whose name I really hope I pronounced correctly. He and the students of Elizabethtown Area High School are watching. It's wonderful to see y'all in Elizabethtown, Pennsylvania. Moving west to Wisconsin, we're excited to have Mr. Zellner's class with us from Holman Middle School. The Vikings are online in the Badger State. And we've got some icebreakers here as well. That's the mascot of Innerkip Central School. Hello to Mrs. Elliott's class in Innerkip, Ontario, Canada. Rockport's the name of a seaside town in Massachusetts. The U.S. Census says around 7,000 people live there. And one problem some of them are dealing with is a vandal. Someone is flitting around breaking car mirrors, and that someone's a bird. Experts say that when male woodpeckers are looking for a mate, they'll attack anything that looks like another male. What they see in mirrors fits the bill, get it? So at least one wily woodpecker there is pecking on glass. Of course, if he's caught, he could be charged with beaking and splintering, embezzlement, racketeering, burglary, vehicular mirror slaughter, cyberbullying, attempted murder, or DWI, drilling without a license. So he ought to go back to woodworking and take his place in the pecking order unless Woody wants to be a jailbird. I'm Carl Azuz for The World from A to Z. It means the world to have you watching our show.